Let's grab HC again from the QHC from Tennessee. Says the Bible is a moral guide, and we do have confirmation that the audio is working this time, at least on one end. So let's give it a shot. HC, can you hear us? If
Yes,
HC can hear us, we can. Oh, there we go. We got him. HC? Hello?
Yes.
Gotcha. All right, HC, welcome in. You're talking to Justin and Planet Peterson. There might be a slight delay, so bear with us. We'll try not to talk over each other. The claim on entry is that the Bible is a moral guide. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, it's a way that you can kind of it helps you with your life. Like, let's say your situation in the Bible, it's an answer to everything in the Bible.
Okay, so you think the Bible is like, so if I open the Bible and say, listen, I've got questions about like what to do. I don't know, say for example, if my children act up, you think the Bible would be the guide for letting you know what to do?
Yes, because the Bible talks about how to, like, to discipline your kids, like, lovingly, and like, show them, like, this instruction of the Lord, like, to tell your parents not to provoke their children.
Right. Okay. So I'm pretty familiar with some of the biblical laws. Let me know if you think these should be applicable. So like we can go to Deuteronomy 21. It says, if someone has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey his father and mother, who does not heed them when they discipline him, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his town. And at the gate of that place, I shall say to the elders of the town, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He's a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of the town shall stone him to death. You shall purge the evil from your midst. You think that's like good behavior to enact with our families?
This is like a different kind of society than the one we live in today. This is a barbaric society, one that was rough around the edges. We didn't have like a lot of.
Sure was. Yeah.
With respect specifically to children, Proverbs has some real doozies. Proverbs 22:15, folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it away. Proverbs 23:13 and 14, do not withhold discipline from a child. If you punish them with the rod, they will not die. Punish them with the rod and save them from death. And Proverbs 29:15, the rod of correction imparts wisdom, but a child left undisciplined disgraces its mother. So the Bible's pretty keen on beating some sense or behavior into your children. But like today, we know that this is absolutely a horrendous thing to do. It's not effective, apart from just being grossly offensive and causing harm. It's just not effective. I mean, they've removed corporal punishment even from juvenile detention centers pretty much across the entire nation. Oddly, you can still do it in public schools in a huge number of states, but not juvenile detention centers, which is pretty strange. But so if we acted biblically, this just would not, first of all, modern people, I don't think, would call this very moral, but it's also just stupid, terrible advice that we know for a fact doesn't work.
Well, for back then, these laws were given by God for a certain context before forgiveness of sins could be achieved.
But you are telling us that the Bible can be used as a moral guide, except apparently it can't. Like, what's the use of saying, oh, back then well, okay, there's so many things going on here. Do you think that somehow children in the past were different than children of today, and that you could beat good behavior into children in the past? Because I don't think that was ever the case. I think Proverbs was wrong back then too.
Well, I mean, is there like any proof that it's not just metaphorical in the way it's speaking?
But they're laws. In fact, in Deuteronomy 28, God gives you all kinds of punishments if you break the laws. He does the same thing in Leviticus 26. He even goes on to say, like if you break these laws, if you disobey me, this is what's going to happen. Says, if you disobey me and continue hostile to me, I will continue hostile to you in fury, and in turn I will punish you myself sevenfold for your sins. And he says, you will eat the flesh of your sons and you will eat the flesh of your daughters. Like, do you think that that's a necessary thing to punish people with eating the flesh of their children?
No, not really. But did that ever come true? Was God just making a threat, saying this is what would happen if you choose to disobey me?
It did come true, yeah. If you read Jeremiah 19:9 and Lamentations, during the siege in Jerusalem, God sends an army, and the battle is so intense that they get holed up inside of the city walls, and they end up having to consume their own children to survive. And God says He's the one that causes that.
Jesus in the New Testament says that you should not harm children. He says it himself, like in the New Testament.
Actually, he says that kind of. He contradicts himself in Matthew chapter 7 when he chastises the Pharisees for not executing the rebellious son, or the son that curses mother and father. So he wants you to behave a particular way, but he also wants you to follow the law. In Mark 7.
Is that?
Yeah, Mark 7. He's chastising them for following Talmudic hand-washing laws. And he says, you abandon the commandments of God and hold to human tradition. Then he said to them, you have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and mother, and whoever speaks evil of the father must surely die. But you say that if anyone tells father or mother whatever support you might have had from me as korban, that is an offering to God, then you no longer permit them to do anything for the father or the mother. So what he's saying here is like this law of Moses that allows you to execute children that curse their parents, you're not doing it. You're supposed to be doing this. You guys are hypocrites.
Yes, but he never really, like, there's a story where Jesus says not to throw the stone on the woman. Why would Jesus be advocating for stoning children?
John chapter 8, yeah. So in John, first of all, I think there's two things with John chapter 8. I don't think Jesus actually said anything in that particular episode with the adulterous woman. That was something that doesn't show up until the 5th century in the manuscript evidence, and it first appears as a marginal note. It appears that it was a popular story that made its way into the Bible. Second of all, I don't think he was advocating for abrogating the law of Moses in the way that you think. Not that he doesn't do it elsewhere, but what he was doing in that passage is actually kind of smart, because he's saying, listen, the law says we got to stone this woman, right? Now, what he doesn't want to do is say, don't do it, because he knows he's stuck. He's got to advocate for the law of Moses because he does everywhere else. So what he does, he says, listen, if you do what the law tells you to do by stoning this woman, you're next. You without the first, ye who doesn't have any sin cast the first stone, meaning, listen, if you stone her, you can do it. You're more than welcome to do it. But if we're going to be carrying out this law effectively, you guys are next. So think carefully about whether or not you want this to actually happen. That being said, I don't think that story is even original to the gospel.
An important note there is that Jesus is hardly calling for abolition of this cruel and unusual punishment. Right. He's just calling other people hypocrites. I want to try to focus back to your original point, though. What Justin brings up with the killing unruly children. Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, they all say to do that. Now, your claim is we can find morality in the Bible. So if a parent opens up the Bible, and yes, it's Old Testament, but they'll read this and it says, well, if my child is unruly, I can have him executed. Now, do you think that's a good idea? And if you don't think it's a good idea, do you think it was a good idea back then? And then what would be the reasons?
Well, no, I don't think it's a good idea. I think that kids should never be harmed in any way, shape, or form. That's just egregious to me.
But why does God think that they should then?
Well, Paul, that's why God made these laws, is because Paul talks about it being like a mirror to how broken we are. So the laws are never really meant to be like these like authoritative things. Why don't you show how broken we are and how we need a savior like Jesus?
Is God indifferent to whether or not people lie under oath, worship other gods, covet things, etc., murder, steal? Is God indifferent to those things?
No.
Sorry?
No.
Then why would God be indifferent
No,
to
he's not.
his other laws that he gives people?
Well, shouldn't he be saying this is what should happen? It's not really what would really happen.
I don't really
I don't think
understand. So
that-
the consequences are what God doesn't care about? Or the law is what God doesn't care? Because if you're going to say God doesn't want you to stone your children to death for unruly, it's just to show you how broken you are. Okay, well then God doesn't care if I covet my neighbor's wife and if I have affairs and if I lie under, I'm like trying to point to the 10 commandments, right? God doesn't care if I break the 10 commandments then. So because it's just to show how wicked we are, right? So why should we follow any moral advice that we find in the Bible then?
Because the New Testament recontextualizes this into what it really should be, which is love, grace,
Right.
forgiveness. Even in the Old Testament, God shows mercy to people.
But HC, I want you to just for a second to kind of process what Peterson was saying, right? Which is, if God gave these commands, like you're suggesting God gave these commands to do like horrible things to your children, but he didn't actually want you to do it, right? Well, if that's the case, then why wouldn't we just extrapolate this to all the other commands? God didn't want us to be faithful to our spouses. God didn't want us to worship him alone. Like, why are you picking this one command and saying, well, that's not really what God wanted?
Because God has a purpose behind everything he does.
Right, but what measuring stick, what tool are you using to determine that when God gave this command, he didn't want you to follow it, but when he gave the other commands, he did want you to follow it? How do you make that determination?
Well, we have the entirety of Scripture now, and so we can see what exactly God's evolution, what his plan truly was, and God's plan was to institute forgiveness and love.
HC. Okay. Let's say that it's 2022 years ago. So Jesus hasn't been born yet. Okay. What should people do with the laws and prescriptions that are ordained by God at that point, all we have is the Hebrew Bible. What should people have done in the past? Their kids are being unruly. Jesus hasn't been born yet. He hasn't preached anything. Paul hasn't written any letters yet. But morality comes from this supposedly inspired text, and God's morality is supposed to be the correct morality or whatever. So it's 2022, 3, whatever years ago. A child is being unruly. What should a parent do?
Well, they should talk to their kids, and they should try to talk things out. Because even in the Old Testament, God showed forgiveness to David whenever he commits the egregious sin of murder and adultery.
Well, the kid won't listen. Deuteronomy says drag them in front of the town elders and say, this kid won't listen, and then they get stoned to death. So would there be anything wrong if they did that? Because you're presupposing and you're preaching univocality. And if that's the case, then somehow Jewish people before Jesus were born were as if they were going around being like, yeah, we're not supposed to actually follow any of these rules or anything like that. So I'm just curious, what would be, and we'll just go back to my original example. What should they do? The kid won't listen. Are they permitted to drag them in front of the town elders, declare that the child is completely unruly, and stone them to death as prescribed by the Bible?
Yes, they should go see the town elders. Then it should be up to the elders to decide what would need to be done.
Okay, so why is killing children who won't listen, why was that a good thing to do in the past?
But it wasn't a good thing to do ever.
You just said that they should do it.
So God told them to do something that wasn't good.
The elders say to do, which could be.
Yeah, and the elders.
Well, there's a part in the Bible where God, in the Old Testament, talks about child sacrifice. Like he sort of commands it in a way. Then later on, he
does. Yeah.
Them. So I thought this could be another example of that.
Well, no. Ezekiel doesn't say it was to scare them. He says that he gave you commands that you couldn't follow, namely sacrificing your children so that it might horrify you, right? So like the idea is that what you're trying to say right now is that God does give you bad commands. But to what I asked you, and I think what Eric's trying to get to as well, is how do you determine that this is one of those commands? Because God reiterated it over and over again. There's a bunch of places where God tells you these are the situations in which you execute your children.
Like the problem I have with this is what you're telling us, the way to interpret this text, the way to follow this text, to me sounds like the equivalent of, let's say I have a book and it's just full of like all these like terrible things that you're supposed to do for minor infractions. It just prescribes death and torture and all kinds of cruel and unusual punishments. And that's what the book says. It only says those kinds of things. And then people are like, wow, we can't form a society around this. And then somebody comes along and says, well, hey, but you don't understand the context. See, what you don't realize is that book was written on opposite day. So you're actually supposed to do all the opposites. All this stuff you're talking about the later redemption, that you're not supposed to actually follow the law is just meant to show that's not in there anywhere. And like all these caveats you add to it, the thing you added just a little bit ago with the maybe it's analogous to the child sacrifice, like of Isaac, or this other example. It's not meant to be taken literally. Well, it doesn't say that anywhere in there. So as a handbook, I don't think that this is particularly all that good. Now, I think there are good things you can cherry pick in it. I think Jesus, he wasn't really a philosopher, but he is one of my favorite moral philosophers because I agree with a lot of the things he says. But again, if the book is supposed to, be good at this kind of thing, then all this hideous stuff that's in it that needs to be excused away with all of this reasoning that's not to be found by reading the text, but by having a particular worldview about some multi-thousand year arc that you then bake into it, that you read into it, is just not, it's not the kind of thing that you could or should form a society around. It's not the kind of thing that makes any logical sense to me or anything like that.
Yes, but in the story where God tells Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, he doesn't sacrifice Isaac. God comes in the last second to stop it. It was a test of faith. Some of these laws could be interpreted
they lied
as
to him.
Like it's faith in God that you'll never even get to a situation.
But the problem we have is he tells you if you don't follow all the laws, every single one of them, he's going to punish you. And then we see in the Bible him punishing people for not following all of the laws. So like I'm inclined to believe that he wants you to follow the laws. He tells you to follow the laws. Like why would he punish you for not following the laws if he didn't want you to follow them?
Well, I told you this is like a test of faith. See how well do we follow these? Like the Old Testament, New Testament people.
But it doesn't say that,
on a
right?
Scale.
And you can't levy that expectation on people reading a book. All I did was do what it said, but you forgot the book was written on opposite day, right? You can't retreat to that kind of to that sort of defense. It's just not good.
Yeah. I want to do one other thing too for you, HC. You read like one or two passages with me, if you will. Do you have a Bible? I'm going to read something from Deuteronomy chapter 30. You probably think of the New Covenant era, like this idea of the New Covenant era when God is going to circumcise the hearts of the people. Did we learn about this in Ezekiel 44? We learn about it in Jeremiah, and we learn about it elsewhere. But it also comes up in Deuteronomy 30 when he talks about how the Israelites they're going to disobey. because of their disobedience, God is going to send them into exile. And then after the exile, he's going to bring them back. And then he talks about what's going to happen when he finally circumcises their heart, right? It says, the Lord your God will bring you back into the land that your ancestors possessed, and you will possess it. He will make you more prosperous and numerous than your ancestors. Moreover, the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants, so that you will love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, in order that you may live. Now listen, this is where it starts to get good. The Lord your God will put all of these curses on your enemies and on the adversaries who took advantage of you. Then you shall again obey the Lord, observing all of his commandments that I'm commanding you today. And the Lord your God will make you abundantly prosperous in all of your undertakings, in the fruit of your bodies, so on and so forth. And so the idea that he's laying out here is that finally, like when he comes and circumcises the heart of the people, it includes this idea that they're still going to follow the law. Do you see that? Like he never once does the lawgiver say, I don't want you to follow these laws.
Yes, but the law is like in our heart. We live out the law every single day. They're just making good moral choices.
No, he said the laws that I'm giving you today, right? It says in verse 8, then you shall again obey the Lord, observing all of his commandments that I'm giving you today. Meaning this is Moses speaking in Deuteronomy. Remember, it's the second giving of the law. So he's reiterating the law for all the Israelites to hear right before he dies and they enter into the promised land. So he's saying, all of these commands that I've given you today, eventually God's going to circumcise your hearts, and then he's going to want you to obey all of these commands. So they're not going to go away. And HC, you have to know that Jesus agrees with this. Jesus was a Judaizer. In Matthew 5, he says, do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish but fulfill. And he says, truly, I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass away from the law until all is accomplished. And then listen to this. He says, therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So Jesus' own words says that HC, if you practice the laws of Moses, that makes you great in the kingdom of heaven. Do you see that? Did we lose him? I think we lost him. Shit. I think his connection crapped out. Oh, well.
They dropped.
It happens. Or they just dropped. It's hard to say. I feel bad. He was a kind young man, and I think he bit off more than he was ready for.
Yeah.